living with vigor, wonder, and fellowship. Those, as you said, those three boxes. It just reminds people you're not a cog for production. You're not a drain for consumption. You're not a pond for government. You are flesh and blood. You are a human being. You're not a means to an end. You are the end. And this is how we're designed to live, and as a result, to flourish. Vigor, wonder, fellowship. Get it, whatever activities you're into, but get it.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Gallagher. Man, I'm looking forward to this conversation today. I've got a guest who understands what it means to perform at the highest level, no doubt about it. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a Division I football player, 8 years in the Marine Corps. Thank you for your service, Ed, as we go through that. And he's got a master's degree in history, and he loves kettlebells. So I can't imagine we're going to get a chance to talk about today. But he's the author of the new book, The Barbarian in You, Vigor, Wonder, and Fellowship. And we're diving into this warrior poet blueprint, ultimately to help you answer the question, what do I want? And many more. So Ed, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. Great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Fine, John. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad you're here. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, but you don't get a break even as a Marine, although, again, I appreciate your service. I'm going to ask you the same first question I ask all my first-time guests, and that's to tell me a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a person, as a leader, or as a barbarian.
Yeah, I think the one that I tell the most to people that really changed me was I was 17, so late in childhood, right on the cusp of adulthood. And you mentioned I went to the Naval Academy. Well, in between high school and the Naval Academy, I went to the Naval Academy Prep School, which essentially is where they send enlisted Marines or sailors who get into the Naval Academy to prepare them academically, as well as recruited athletes like yours truly, who maybe didn't have the best GPA in high school. And so it's a very intense program academically because they want to set you up for success. And to graduate the Naval Academy Prep School, you have to have a 2.0. Now that sounds easy, at least for me it wasn't at that age. And every day there's 2 calculus classes, every day there's a physics class, there's a chemistry class. So you're really just getting beat up because you're about to go to what essentially is an engineering school. It's probably one of the reasons I majored in history there. And so halfway through the first semester, I had a 1.5 GPA. Now, if I graduate with that, well, I wouldn't graduate and I wouldn't go to the Naval Academy. And I remember being on this is how long ago it was, a payphone. This is 1994. And I was telling my dad, and I remember him saying, well, if it doesn't work out, there's other options. And I started tearing up. And the guy next to me is like, is everything okay? And I'm just covering my face like, yeah, everything's fine. And I went back to my room, and we had these metal desks. And if you open up the top of the desk, everyone had photos from high school up there. So I went and I took all my photos from high school down. I put them in a drawer. And then I started writing note cards like, 2-0 and go, you are going to the Naval Academy. So I decided right there, I need to do something about this. And every single day I went to my math professor's office after class for an hour and got extra instruction every day. Even if I didn't need to go, I was there, always there. And at the end, studying on weekends, everything, I got a C in his class. And because there was 2 math classes, that accounted for 2/5 of my overall GPA. And I had above a 2.0 at the end of that semester. And it was the first real time in my life where I said, I have agency. If there's a challenge, and this was a sink or swim moment, I mean, it would have changed the course of my life forever, whether I succeeded or failed. And it was really a crossroads, and I made the decision to get my act together and to do the work and to use my resources, to use that professor and the people around me who wanted to help me, but they weren't going to help me without me helping myself. And it was a lesson, like I said, in agency, that I have the power to accomplish goals that I set for myself. But it is ultimately on me. My parents aren't going to call the Naval Academy and get me a B. That isn't going to happen. So I had to do the work, and that was a turning point in my life for sure.
No, I love that as a decision. Man, it has to feed into some of those things, some of those stories that were in your book, whether it's directly in there or indirectly in there. But ultimately, it sounds like you went back and says there isn't like an option, a plan B. There's no plan B. It's going to be this plan, and we're going to make it where you're going to write it down. To your point, you had agency. You're going to take control. You had made the choice right then and there. When I teach clients all the time is that one of the first things you got to do is make that choice. And we usually change and we get better out of inspiration or out of desperation. And a little bit of both of those things were probably there for you in terms of the story you didn't want to tell with regards to desperation, but also inspiration in terms of many of the things that you accomplished. So well done.
Said.
And thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story.
My pleasure. It was a great lesson.
Okay, so
and I'm glad I learned it.
Realizing we're talking to a group of leaders here, you've got a piece when you go through the Naval Academy, it's about leadership as well. Whether it's an engineering school, it's about leadership. You play sports, it's got to be about leadership and teamwork as well. As you go through that, Marine, all these different things you've done in terms of leadership. And you come out with this book and you say, the barbarian in you. Now, barbarian sounds like a harsh definition of what would be there. Many people think about it, but tell me what you believe the core definition of barbarian. Explain that from the title standpoint, ultimately. And frankly, some of the barriers maybe that you had, but what are the barriers that we as leaders, as men today face in achieving that status, if you will, and what you're seeing?
That's a good question. So the first part of your question, so a barbarian conjures images of Conan, right? Or the Visigoths sacking Rome. They were the original barbarians, people who lived outside of civilization, let's say. And so, and as defined by the people, of course, who live in civilization. And so I have a fascination with history, and these sort of renegades captivated me with wonder. But as I learned more about them, I learned it was really, for me, what defines a barbarian is how they live. And the barbarian in you is the ancient part of you, the part of you that's connected to your pre-civilized ancestors, the part of you that wants to live in accordance to the rules of nature as we're designed to live. And they lived that way before you could say they were sort of corrupted by technology or civilization. Not against civilization, has a lot of pros, but the barbarians offer us pros too, and I think it's about incorporating the pros of different ways of life. And the barbarians, I deduced, lived with vigor, physically, wonder, spiritually, and fellowship. Just love for each other within their tribe. And those components, to me, offer real lessons. They did them to survive. They had to hunt and fight. That's the vigor. They worshipped their gods. They believed in a supernatural world and in magic that supported them spiritually. And then obviously the fellowship, they had people looking out for them. They did it to survive, but we still need it to thrive. You may not need those things to survive in the 21st century, but every happy person I know has those three things going on in their life, and every unhappy person I know is missing at least one of them. So when you talk about what is holding maybe leaders back from living according to the sort of rule book that we have from nature, the way that we've evolved as a species, and I think more than ever, we're working from home more, we're addicted to technology more, so that automatically is removing fellowship from the space. We're on these screens, that's removing us from nature and the wonder. And we're stationary, so that's removing us from the vigor. So I almost look at it like is that we're at war with civilization. I like Novocaine at the dentist. I like Amazon Prime. I like all that stuff. But I also understand that I'm a human being, and in order to flourish, I need to do things that human beings are meant to do. And when we do that as leaders, we're giving, a mentor of mine often says, give from the overflow, not the reservoir. So you're giving from the overflow because you're coming from a place of being a full, flourishing human being, and the people around you are going to feel that, and they're going to be inspired by that.
Vigor, wonder, fellowship. What I love about that too, to your point, the definition of happy, whether it's happy or fulfilled or whatever word, you got to have all three of those components. And those that are unhappy are probably missing at least one of those components. Look, I sit here today as I read through that simple 3-step framework of kind of saying I need to check these 3 boxes. I shared a little bit with you before we hit the record button.
Yeah.
And last year I'm on my journey kind of doing Spartan races. I did a Spartan trifecta with a group of guys. Fellowship, vigor,
yes,
the discipline that was required to look at that, and certainly the wonder, could I ever do something like that?
Yeah, you can get all 3 in one activity.
Yeah, I get all three in that 1 year, in that full year, and suffered an injury though through that. And I actually just got surgery to repair a hip issue that I had that came out, in November last year. I've been dealing with pain for 5 months and recognized where I'm missing those components now. Like the vigor has gone away. I've not been able to exercise in a way that I want to, or find that vigor in that space. We've stuck with the fellowship, which has been really good. And the wonder has been there with regards to my faith journey and those things like that. But not having that vigor has been something that's been missing for me this year. And again, as I listen to you talk about it right then, you got to have all three of those components.
Yeah.
I can understand a little bit more now why I might be sitting around, and I'll use the term sulking and in a rut, whatever that feels like, because I haven't been able to do that. You said in your book, like your vigor, you love to work out. We're going to get to that. I tend to look at it a little bit differently. I've never been able to say I love to work out, but I love having worked out. I love the feeling when I'm done, kind of thing. And I can't get that feeling right now with that vigor.
Yeah, that's, and that is nature. What our ancestors felt, they felt the endorphins with vigor. They felt the serotonin with wonder. They felt the oxytocin, the love hormone with, it's how they evolved. And we still feel that. We're still designed that way. So we may not do exactly what they did, but we can mimic the things they did to get those feelings. And the last thing I'll say is, look, I know you're longer in the tooth than me, I think. And so I say this with extreme caution, but I have a torn labrum in my hip. I've had multiple injuries throughout my life and ailments. And I haven't been able to run in maybe like 15 years, but now I'll ride a bike. I can't do certain movements with those kettlebells. I used to just be an absolute savage with them. And now I have to tone it. I'm 50. I have to tone it down, and I can't do the things. And I address that in the book. It's like, the way I got fellowship with my buddies when I was 21 is very different than it is now.
Yeah.
And I'm just not up for the shenanigans and things because I'm just older. But you still.
It's funny. This group has talked about because we're older. I mean, we're mid 50s to late 50s, and we're like, we're feeling funky after that half marathon, and we got to find something different, whether it's a hike or whatever that is, to get that fellowship and to get that vigor. Yep. Yeah. So, and again, that group is very important. We'll talk about that. Look, I want to dive into each one of those points a little bit in terms of your book without sharing the whole thing. Folks are going to need to get a copy of your book because I think there's some great examples and stories that you wrote, and I can see that history side of you in these stories. That's really good. But you said basically that you need a painful experience ultimately that leads to answering the question, what do I want? Was there a painful experience for you that kind of led you to even this framework, or what got you there?
For sure. Yeah, I think awareness comes from pain. Changes in your life, for most people, at least for me and a lot of people I've observed, comes from that. So a moment in my life. So towards the end of my career in the Marine Corps, I was really frustrated. So despite being deployed to Iraq, I was in Afghanistan in 2001, so right after 9/11, and other places throughout the world. This may sound weird to people, but believe it or not, as a Marine, I wanted combat. I wanted to get shot at, desperately wanted to get shot at and prove myself as a warrior. All these books behind me and all these things I had read throughout history. I wasn't naive to the suffering of war. Probably a little naive, but I wasn't that naive. But as a young man, it's just in my nature. I hate war and I'm anti-war, but all I do is read about war and I'm fascinated by it at the same time. And so I wasn't getting that. And when you're in the military, for those who are listening who are in the military, you're government property. You do what the needs of the Marine Corps. It's not what I want, it's what they need. And that's what you do. And as a result of that and the bureaucracy, I just wasn't sent into certain scenarios, and I was leading a platoon in more benign environments throughout the world. And that really got to me, and it got to my ego. And I was suffering a lot, so much that I started developing back pain. I didn't know why, but years later it was absolutely psychosomatic. And so I'm suffering. When you have an expectation for your life and it isn't being met, it's really difficult. And I was suffering that. And eventually I was on a dirt road, literally driving on a dirt road in a pickup truck in Cuba believe it or not. And it was the perfect metaphor because I had veered off the main road onto the dirt road at 3 a.m, heading like literally towards a minefield. And I just screamed and exercised this out of me, and eventually I asked myself, what do I want? What can I do? You know, I had forgotten that lesson I learned at the prep school, that I have agency, that I can do things in my life, that I don't have to be dependent on an institution or an organization to give me the life, because it doesn't care. It's an organization. It's not even human. And at that point, I said to I decided to leave the Marine Corps. And I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have written this book. I wouldn't have pursued my master's degree in history. All the things that I wanted to do, my career in private security, none of that would have happened, at least not at that point in my life, had it not been for the pain. And that released me because it made me ask this one simple question. What do you want? What do you want if nobody ever knew about it? What would you do if there was no accolades? And it helped me separate myself from my ego and work towards who I truly am. And that autonomy, like I said, without the pain, I think it's human nature just to, you keep doing what you're doing. It's just easier than changing your life. And the pain made me, I couldn't go on doing that. So.
Yeah, and you talked about that. I mean, that's so good. Again, people change when the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of the change itself.
That's
in terms
right.
of helping 100%. Us get better.
Yeah.
Are you tired of being tired? I know I was. That's when I was glad to find Own It Coaching. Now my resting heart rate's down 20%. Sleep quality up 300%. I just ran my first Spartan Rage at age 56. I feel better than I ever have. So if you're ready to stop settling and start owning your own health, go to CoachJohnGallagher.com/own it and set up a free call with the Own It coaching team. That's CoachJohnGallagher.com/own it. Now, let's get back to the episode.
You touched on something inside the book, and you almost went there here, but it's also thinking about what do I want. It's not necessarily what everybody else wants, and you may be mocked when that happens. You talked about that inside of your book about, what have you loved so much that others actually mock it? Did you experience that when you said, I'm out of the Marines, I'm done, and I want to go study history?
Yeah. There's a story in the book about Emerson when he leaves the church. He was a pastor, and when you leave people behind and pursuing another thing, sometimes the people you leave behind resent you because they feel they have open wounds that you're pressing on by leaving what they care about. Right? And another chapter in the book, the author Ray Bradbury has a great term for this. He calls it joy envy. I just love that. And when you're exercising freedom and maybe doing something that other person wishes they could do or wants to do but doesn't, sometimes they resent you for that. So when I left the Marine Corps, some people were great. They were like, yeah, do your thing. You served 8 years. But for the career guys, 8 years isn't long enough. You need to do 20.
Yeah, you need 20, right.
Yeah, they're like, you got to do what they're doing because that reinforces what they're doing. And we've all met people like that. Whatever they're doing is the thing to do. And if you're doing it, it's the wrong decision. So
yeah, absolutely.
I recognize that was their ego. It had nothing to do with me. And, I trusted what I felt. I've tried to live this way. And when it wasn't a match anymore in the Marine Corps and I had to leave, I felt that and then I did. And then I asked, what do I want to do? Everyone's like, you should go get your MBA or whatever. And I'm like, but I love history. I'd love to master that. Well, you can't do anything with that. Well, we'll see. You know what I mean? But I know that gaining mastery in something is an investment in yourself and you gain intangibles. So I followed my heart, went and studied history for 2 years, didn't listen to the naysayers, and then my success in private security, I became a bodyguard, literally. But there's a lot of writers and there's a lot of bodyguards. There's not a lot who do both. And so I found a niche for myself, and my vehicle for success at the company where I worked, Gavin DeBecker and Associates, whose founder is a best-selling author, my writing became the vehicle for my success. So if I had not followed my heart and gone and gained some mastery in history and research and writing, I wouldn't have been successful in a completely unrelated field. And I'm glad I didn't listen to the people who took it upon themselves to tell me what to do with my life.
I refer to them as should-heads. They tell you what you should do this, you should do that. And don't be a should-head. Just kind of listen through and understand. I'd love that in terms of no pun intended, about finding what you love and then ultimately becoming the best at it, becoming a master of it, and making
That's
that
right. It
possible.
takes work, right? It's not like,
absolutely.
oh, you just kind of do what you want or whatever. No, you focus, and I worked my ass off in grad school becoming better, and it paid off.
Absolutely. Hey, and I knew as well, in fact, when I was sharing kind of your story a little bit with my wife before we did the podcast, she said, oh, he was the child of the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
You reference not only historical figures in your book like Patton, and you just mentioned Ray Bradbury and things like that. Michael de Montaigne. I don't even know how to say
Montaigne. Michel de Montaigne.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But you also like the profound leaders, David Lee Roth.
Oh, yeah,
and
Van Halen.
Yeah, I mean,
Def Leppard.
So
there's a chapter.
And Def Leppard. What did David Lee Roth? What does he have to do with Vigor?
Everything. Dave. So yeah, guilty. I love 80s hard rock. Grew up in the 80s watching the 18.
That's not hard rock. David Lee Roth and Def Leppard. That's good.
Okay, well, it's good times rock and roll. Let's agree on that. And so music has always been inspiring to me. I've never tried to over intellectualize my musical taste. I'm all about feeling. My entire existence in this life is one. I think that defines our existence: good, bad, and many in between. And that, Roth always, I just found him such a peculiar, interesting human being because no one was like him before, and then everyone was like him after. And so I started reading about Van Halen, and I love their music. And I found out David Lee Roth, he grew up Jewish in Indiana. He had leg braces on his legs. Like, this is the guy who used to jump off the drum riser and was incredibly athletic. And he had all these challenges. And he moved, his parents, his dad was an optometrist. They moved to Pasadena, and the timing was perfect. Right? It was like the late 60s and what was going on in pop culture. And so eventually he starts, he's a good-looking guy. He's gregarious. He has these things probably stemming from feeling insignificant as youth. I can identify with that, of becoming loud and wanting the spotlight. But he had one problem as an aspiring singer. He couldn't really sing. And I found that fascinating. One of the most famous lead singers of that era in rock and roll couldn't really sing. How did he become who he is? And it was sheer vigor. He's like, okay, I'm going to try to get my singing up. I'm going to take voice lessons. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do martial arts. I'm going to take dance lessons. I'm going to hustle. I'm going to find the best musicians and somehow get them to agree to be in my band. And he found Alex and Eddie Van Halen, who were gifted, incredible musicians. And they hated him. But he overcame their hatred, to be like, you need me and I need you. And he just wouldn't quit. People threw beer bottles at him because, he dressed in flamboyant ways. It was all these beer drinking guys. And then you look at David Lee Roth and he's in these videos. He's wearing like assless chaps and all this crazy thing. And who are his fans? It's a bunch of like blue collar beer drinking guys. So like he converted them to his will, and he converted the Van Halen brothers to his will. He converted the fact that people said he couldn't sing. It didn't matter, and he still got signed and became this platinum frontman. and that is vigor. The odds are against you. Everybody's talking shit about you, rooting against you, and he just wouldn't listen, and he put his head down, and he became a rock star. It's and did it with incredible style.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, look, folks, the book, you got to get a copy of the book, and we'll ask you at the end here a little bit about where you want folks to go and get that. But it's full of stories like that, both historical figures, again, going back into the 1600s as well, and rock singers like David Lee Roth and Def Leppard, which are really good. And that you start talking about about Def Leppard really in the section on fellowships. We talked about vigor. We talked about kind of wonder and loving what you do. And the fellowship side, I think it's something, especially men today, miss big time. And you talked about this term, the point of view crew. Tell me a little bit about that, but why is fellowship so important to leaders and to men today, and how we miss it?
I think, historically, barbarians, let's go all the way back, they gathered around the fire, the men spent time together. The World War II generation came back from war and they joined, the Elks Club and bowling leagues, and all community was very important. But as technology increased, the advent of the television, the advent of cable TV, the VCR, all the way to where we are now, it's pulling people away from their front porch, right? From their neighbors. And then the way that work today is completely, it's not 9 to 5 anymore. It seems like it's always around. It's pulling people away from friends and spending time with friends, and then by the time you're done and it's Friday, you just want to lay on the couch because you're exhausted, right? And that happened to me in my 30s when I was really grinding in my career. I suddenly realized that I didn't have any friends in Los Angeles. I had friends from the military or college, that were living elsewhere. And it was, like I said, I wasn't happy because I had the vigor and I was still reading. I had the wonder and stuff like that, but I didn't have the fellowship. So I live, the name of my street is Point View Street. So I called up my wife's friends, boyfriends, and husbands, who I didn't even really know that well. But I knew a little bit about them. I had met them here or there at like a party or something with my wife. And I was like, hey, I'd love to have you guys over for dinner. And we could just, I'm an avid reader, and from what I know, you are too. And just bring a book over and we can just discuss it. And it was 6 guys. And then now I do it close to every quarter. And I've had as many as 25 guys.
Oh, that's so good.
And what it developed is, we meet up and then we go out back around a fire. And we go around the horn, and each guy gets a few minutes to not only share the book, but the best part, what's going on in your life. Good things, bad things. And what I learned with men is when women aren't around and men leave ego at the door, they're vulnerable with each other. And it feels natural to be sharing this with another group of men because they sort of understand what you're probably going through, and they're supportive. And since I started doing that, so many at the end of the night are like, I needed this, thank you. Because they were in the same situation as me. And even their wives and girlfriends are like, he needed this, thank you. They don't resent the fact that I'm not inviting women. And they probably don't want to talk about history for 3 hours either. But these guys, and I've had men from all walks of life in a lot of ways, just share incredibly vulnerable things about guys getting emotional, and it's sort of a sanctuary where they can do that. And so that's the Point View crew. Yeah.
Love that. That's so good. I got a buddy, I'm going to force him to listen just to that part. I think we'll get a clip of that. Folks, go back and listen to that. He literally built a fire pit in the backyard of his house with that vision, where he was just going to invite men to sit around that fire pit and talk about that and the importance of that. Men from his neighborhood, men from his church, and things like that. So I can see, and again, you even talking about it grew from 6 to 25 or 30. There's a difference there where folks be like, hey, nobody's going to show up. The distraction, the critic, whoever in our ear. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So well done.
But what I learned is there's a real thirst for it from other men. Yeah. So anyone out there listening, start your own club, start your own salon, whatever you're into. If it's sports, if it's history, if it's whatever, find people who maybe share that interest. Because as men, we always need a ball, right? We always need something that it's about, but it's not.
You see my baseball sitting there, and the football sitting up top.
That's right.
There's a basketball in the room.
You're with your buddies and you're playing hoops or whatever, but then before and after you're talking about real life things, and that's That's how I did it with books.
Speaking of ball, which position did you play for the Naval Academy?
You're not going to believe it. I was an offensive lineman.
No, you're right. I won't believe it.
Yeah, I know. Everyone was like, what were you, a safety? Yeah. I was like, no, I played guard. I used to weigh 280 pounds. Yeah, I was recruited as a tight end, and they did away, the new offense came in with the new coaching staff. They did away with the tight end, and I found out that it was easier to gain weight than to become a better athlete. So
good.
I played a lot.
Hey, I'm curious again. So we kind of even tie a bow around the book itself. When a reader, I talk about being the book test. When a reader puts it down or puts it up on a shelf, like the one sitting beside you, and they see the binding of that book, okay, a year later, what do you want them to think or do after they've read your book, and certainly after they see it a year later as well?
That's a great question. I hope what they can do is recommend it to a friend, because the aim of the book is inspiration, and the more people I can inspire, and these are stories that I'm inspired by, stories from history, stories from music and popular culture, and even some stories from my own life. And the aim is to inspire and remind people how to live. I'm not telling anyone how to live. I'm just saying This is nature. This is evolution. And if you don't move your body and you don't get outside, you're probably not going to be happy. It's not my rule book. It's just my observations. And hopefully when they recommend that, they see the spine and they're like, oh, yeah, the Barbarian in you, Vigor, Wonder, Fellowship, a simple 3-word message.
3 words, yeah.
They'll pass that on to a friend who maybe could use a little bit of inspiration to live that way.
Well, after this, we're recording this just a couple weeks before it comes out on July 6th. I'm just going to put a date in there and mess it up, but that's okay because it doesn't really matter. But it's probably going to be released after that date. Where do you want folks to go and get a copy of your book? And where do you want them to go to connect with you as well?
Yeah, so barbarianinyou.com. They can find me. Instagram, Ed_Hinman, Hinman. They can find me. And on Amazon, if you hopefully when you type in The Barbarian in You, you're going to find the book. And if you go to the website too, there's, there'll be a link that you can get directly to Amazon. And that's the best way.
Yeah, great. Barbarianinyou.com. And you also got a blog on there that folks can follow as well that you're doing because you're a writer, right?
Yeah. I have 70 plus pieces on there, free for anyone who wants to read them, and really tapping into history. And I believe history's fuel. History inspire. When I look at the positive I realize it's positive, negative. It's very nuanced. But when I focus on the positive attributes of someone from history, it's inspiring and then I do things. It inspires me. It's so that for me it's fuel. It's not just feeding a curiosity.
That's the key, and inspires to action. I was listening. In fact, I was listening to one of our mutual friend Nick's from Book Thinkers post today on Instagram, and he said if you read a book and all you do is put it back on the shelf and do nothing about it, it goes from education just to entertainment. It really just is entertainment. And you need to take that from education to action, which creates wisdom, which I just thought was a really good and
That's
timely
really well said.
Quote from Nick to make that happen. And you mentioned even recommend the book. I'm a big fan of sharing a book. So when you buy one, folks buy 2 with the plans of sharing it with somebody as well, so they put a copy in their hands too. We'll put the links in the show notes to make that happen. Ed, this has been a great conversation. I know we could talk a lot longer. I want to honor your time and what we've got going on with the weekend coming up. But I want to ask you one more question. You get kind of the last word here. It's the last question that I always ask my first-time guests. And you may have already said it, but it's compiling this together for you. I'm going to give you a billboard. Put it out there in L.A., man. A bunch of people are going to see it out there in L.A. and SoCal or wherever you want to put it. But what's the one message you would put on that billboard, and why do you put that message on?
It's got to be living with vigor, wonder, and fellowship. Those, as you said, those 3 boxes. It just reminds people you're not a cog for production. You're not a drain for consumption. You're not a pawn for government. You are flesh and blood. You are a human being. You're not a means to an end. You are the end. And this is how we're designed to live, and as a result to flourish. Vigor, wonder, fellowship. Get it, whatever activities you're into, but get it.
Get it, go get it. Love it. Ed, I've truly enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank you for adding value to the listeners of the Uncommon Leader podcast. Wish you the best with the book and everything else going forward, okay?
Thanks so much, John. It was a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
Great conversation with Ed Hinman there. The Barbarian in You. I think it's going to be a great book. Vigor, Wonder, and Fellowship. I think it's going to be a phenomenal read. I'm looking forward to getting my hard copy in the mail when it comes out, and I'm sure you will as well. Hey, if you liked what you heard, share it with somebody who else needs to hear it. It's important to get it in the hands of as many listeners as we can to get folks listening in and engaged with the Uncommon Leader. If you haven't already, love to have a review from you as well on the platform that you listen. Until next time, go and grow champions.